Alrighty, good morning everyone. Dr. Randall Gates, board certified chiropractic neurologist, also a chiropractic physician at Gates Brain Health. What I do is referred to as functional neurology. The concept of functional neurology is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity refers to the fact that our brain can change in certain circumstances, good and bad, typically referred to in a positive connotation. And neuroplasticity became a concept, pretty common in the 1980s. I think it was kicked around in the 1970s. Eric Kandel, one of the world's foremost neuroscientists, basically discovered how snails learn, the aplasia snail, if I remember correctly. And so anyways, since then, scientists have been trying to discover how our brain can adapt, how our brain can change. Because for the longest time, it's like, well, if you have a brain injury, then it is what it is. You had so many neurons or brain cells in your cerebral cortex. Let me see if I can grab the brain model. So you have so many neurons in your cerebral cortex, and it's finite, and then you're only going to lose them through time. Well, neuroplasticity says, well, maybe we can change parts of the brain. Have there been studies on neuroplasticity that haven't been fruitful? Yeah, particularly relative to like Alzheimer's disease, where there's what we call a neurodegenerative process in the brain, where parts of the brain are literally degenerating, shrinking. You can think of it that way. And if you have an Alzheimer's patient do memory tasks, it's probably not going to work. However, there are other things we can do in terms of neuroplasticity to help many other conditions and things that we're finding relative to the memory area and even dementias. So today we're talking about, again, I'm not coming out saying that there's a cure for dementia. I'm just saying in the neuroplasticity literature, we're finding there are a lot of things we can do to shape our brain, to change our brain. And because the name of the clinic is Gates Brain Health, we're all about brain health. And we're trying to spread the word on things that may be important to different conditions. So that is the preamble. It's a little longer preamble than usual. And good morning to everybody who's joining. Great to see all of you. And I guess we'll get into the talk. So let me go from beginning. Okie dokie. Here we go. All right. So the aging hippocampus, interactions between exercise, depression, and BDNF. So BDNF, again, stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Big word. In essence, it's a neurotrophic factor, so meaning it promotes growth. It's produced within the brain cells of primarily our frontal cortex as well as our limbic system. The limbic system is the middle part of the brain, particularly this area called the cingulate gyrus. This white structure you can see here is the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is kind of like a coaxial cable, so to speak, binding the hemispheres together. But you can see it's a pretty large structure. It's all of your white matter, so to speak, the wires of your neurons. Surrounding the corpus callosum is the cingulate gyrus. Deeper down in areas of the temporal lobe, we have the hippocampus. The memory area bordering next to that is the amygdala, the fear center. There's the parahippocampal region. And so simply, let's say I say, okay, remember train, neuron, red. And I tell you those words, your frontal lobe has to grasp those words. You're going to send signals down deep into your parahippocampal and hippocampal region. And then we can see if there's enough neurological energy, we can actually then create a working memory such that if I ask you in 3 minutes, what 3 words did I give you? You can say, train, neuron, red, or whatever it was. So nonetheless, that's kind of how neuroplasticity works within the memory pathways. But relative to BDNF is produced within the neurons themselves. And when it's produced within these neurons, it actually helps them to grow. It helps them to be stronger. And that's what we want. We want strong, vital neurons. Think of like growth hormone, for example. When we're young, we are producing a lot of growth hormone. It helps us to grow tall. It helps us to grow big. It helps us to have lean muscle. Well, as we age, we don't produce as much growth hormone. So we don't get bigger, we don't get stronger, we don't get, taller because our growth plates fuse. So that's an example of a growth factor, whereas brain-derived neurotrophic factor is very similar for your neurons. Okay, BDNF is not produced in all areas of the brain. It's actually primarily produced in the areas that I mentioned. Interestingly, though, it will go in a retrograde fashion to many different areas of the brainstem. So, for example, your serotonin is produced in the raphe nuclei. I know everybody out there says serotonin is produced in your gut. Yes, it is produced in your gut. But most of the serotonin used in your brain is actually produced by this nucleus magnus raphe complex in your brainstem. Think of them as the raphe nuclei. Your norepinephrine is produced in an area in the pons called the locus coeruleus. Some say it's a little higher in the pons, but basically in your brainstem, the locus coeruleus produces norepinephrine. So these neurons project to many different areas of your brain, sending the chemicals like serotonin, like norepinephrine. Your nucleus accumbens in your ventral tegmental area is going to produce your dopamine. So these chemicals go into the brain, and it's interesting that neurotrophic factor produced in the frontal lobes actually goes in what we call retrograde fashion down those neurons back into the brain stem. So you have retrograde transport of BDNF back down into your raphe complex, your locus coeruleus. I know these are big words. Point being, I think it's good to know where's BDNF produced and where does it go. Now, why is BDNF so important? Well, I keep putting the brain model back together. I probably should keep it apart. I didn't put together a great slide on the hippocampus, but so many of you have heard me talk about the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the memory area. It kind of looks like a tail in the temporal lobe, and it is plastic, so it can grow, it can shrink. We're supposed to produce 700 new brain cells a day in the hippocampus. When we are under chronic stress, or let's say we've been exposed to trauma earlier in life, or let's say we don't produce chemicals like serotonin or norepinephrine as well, because we have an MTHFR polymorphism, well, those circumstances can lead to the hippocampus shrinking and us not making as many new brain cells in the hippocampus. Well, BDNF helps production of neurogenesis in your hippocampus. That's why it's exquisitely important, as well as the rest of your limbic system and your frontal lobes. So brain-derived neurotrophic factor, if you have less of it, you're going to have less potential to grow your memory area. The really interesting thing about BDNF is that it's increased by physical exercise. So when we do aerobic exercise, for example, we produce more brain-derived neurotrophic factor. If we are sedentary, we don't produce as much brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So that is really interesting. So here in this article, they're talking about the aging hippocampus, interactions between exercise, depression, and BDNF. As you can see, current research, oh gosh, I can't stand it when I do that. Current research, if you look down here at the bottom of the slide, current research suggests that BDNF Val66 MET polymorphism may only be weakly associated with hippocampal atrophy in late adulthood. These conclusions are interpreted in relation to age-related memory impairment and preventions for hippocampal atrophy. So what that means is that you can have polymorphisms, genetic polymorphisms involving production of BDNF. So some people produce more BDNF than others. So one of the things that I do with patients who are not responding to medical antidepressant therapy, because this whole talk that we're doing is on treatment-resistant depression, one of the things I do is I screen people for their ability to produce BDNF. So maybe you have a genetic impairment in producing it, and they're saying that has a mild effect on hippocampal atrophy, but that can be an important feature for depression. So maybe those people who have a BDNF polymorphism, they need to exercise more. So creating a tailored treatment-centered approach, so to speak. So a tailored treatment for you and your situation, why maybe you're not responding to different antidepressants, is very, very important. So this is out of neuroplasticity, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, depression, and physical activity making the neuroplastic connection. And they talk about, basically, you can go back and read it, but it's summarizing everything I basically have said thus far. What I liked in this article is this diagram. Basically, they're talking about biological, environmental, and pharmacological factors like antidepressants can promote more BDNF. You can exercise. Clearly, that improves BDNF. So we modulate BDNF signaling, and that alters hippocampal neurogenesis, survival, plasticity, connectivity, and function, which then affects mood. Because it seems so weird that depression is really, and from a biological perspective, it's an illness of the memory area, which is just like, what? I don't have dementia. True. But if you have depression, the physiology of depression is atrophy of the hippocampus. Are there other things? Yes. And I've talked about everything from the microbiome to obesity to hormones to genetics. But here we're getting kind of more structured or more centered, so to speak, to the nitty-gritty of the issue, which is the volume of your memory area. So by exercising or by taking antidepressants, for example, that can modulate BDNF. And I just liked this summary. For those of you who want to go back and read it, I think it's cool. You can pause the video, but basically they're saying peripheral reductions in mature BDNF in serum and plasma have been noted in persons with depression in cases of suicide, and psychosocial stress appears to exert a role in these decrements. Finding from recent meta-analysis, blah, blah, blah. Basically showed lower levels of serum mature BDNF in antidepressant-free patients with major depressive disorder as compared to healthy controls. So we see people who are depressed have less BDNF. The hard part is if somebody is depressed, they don't have the energy lots of times to go exercise. So you're telling somebody who can barely get off the couch to go run a mile, that's somewhat of a difficult task or a monumental task, so to speak, in that situation. But again, from a multimodal perspective, trying to combine different treatments between dietary changes and affecting the microbiome and making sure hormones are correct and, addressing MTHFR polymorphisms and getting people exercising at least a low level, those can be the things that bring somebody out of, a state of depression who may not be responding or who may not want to take antidepressants. So this is just a summary of different references, and you can pause the video where they basically were showing that, these different studies, larger sample sizes, moderate intensity aerobic physical exercise for 2 weeks, increased serum BDNF following physical activity, increased memory on face name matching. So they do these studies where they have people exercise, and all of a sudden you see BDNF go up in the body, in the blood, it's going up in the brain. You see improvements in brain function. That's neuroplasticity. And then this is I always smile. I'm from a place called Grass Valley. It's kind of known for being a hippy-dippy area, which I say proudly from an alternative standpoint. So anyways, had to throw in an article on yoga. And here they said depression is associated with lower serum BDNF and elevated serum levels of cortisol. So they had these people do yoga. And basically they found... let me see here. Significant improvement in depression scores and serum BDNF levels and reduction in serum cortisol in the yoga group. So you can do yoga and you can improve your BDNF. So even if you're not feeling the energy to exercise, doing something like yoga can improve depression scores, and it can, basically improve your BDNF. So hopefully, this is just more reinforcement that depression is such a multifactorial problem. It's not just a chemical problem in the brain, as it has been labeled, sadly to say, based on advertising for different therapies. And it's not a weakness, and lots of times there's such a stigma associated with it. It's really sad. But for those of you wanting more information on depression, here's another tidbit. So let's see if we have any comments. Do brain games affect BDNF production? Great question. I don't know. I would say if they reduce stress, there's a good probability that they do, but I can't say for sure. But that is a great question. So, all right, it is about 15 minutes in. I hope you all have a wonderful Saturday. Enjoy your weekend, be safe, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another talk on depression. I think we're going to do a Facebook event for next Saturday. Next Saturday, we're going to talk about childhood trauma and depression. So if you know anyone who's suffering with depression, clue them in to our Wednesday and Saturday broadcasts. That'd be great. And I think that's it. All right, everyone. Have a great day.